Welcome to this week's edition of Prep Zone Extra Points, sponsored by John Hoffer Jeep Chrysler. This week featuring Rick Peterson, Tim Beisel, and Brent Maycock.
Hey, high school sports fans. Welcome to another episode of Extra Points. I'm Tim Beisel, the executive sports editor here at the Topeka Capital Journal and CJ Online. Once again, joined by our two prep experts, Brent Maycock and Rick Peterson. We will start with some scores from tonight's action. Another good one on the high school scene. In our area game of the week, tonight was the War on 24. And as usual, it was a dandy. Number 2, Silver Lake, knocked off Rossville 36-28. The Eagles snapping the two-time defending state champs' 32-game winning streak behind a 303-yard night from Dalton Doltmeyer. In our city game of the week, Washburn Rural defeated Hayden 33-6. Rural improves to 3-2, thanks in part to 4 scores from Jordan White, 3 rushing scores. In maybe the best city game tonight, closest anyway, Topeka High edges Shawnee Heights 32-28. Freshman Kai Thomas has a huge night, 223 yards and 4 TDs, including the game-winning 21-yarder with just over a minute to play. Manhattan doubled up Seaman 42-21. Ian Trapp with another big night for the Indians, rushing for 241 yards and 4 TDs to kind of help the Indians pull away from a game that was really close throughout much of the first half. And in the final 2 games this week, Junction City defeated Highland Park 42-12. The Scots did take an early lead thanks in part to a Junction City turnover, but they just couldn't keep pace with the Blue Jays down the stretch. And Emporia kind of wallops Topeka West 40-7, like Highland Park West falls to 0-5 this season. Well, that kind of sets the table for our first segment tonight, appropriately called Starting Points. Brent, as our war correspondent, so to speak, we will start with you tonight.
I'm under fire already.
You're already under fire, absolutely. What jumped out at you tonight?
Well, it jumps out that Silver Lake Rossville is what it always is. It was an incredibly entertaining game. Silver Lake got out to a big lead, 22-0 in the first half. Rossville fights back to within a score. Silver Lake gets back up 22 points. And then Rossville takes advantage of turnovers and some big plays, gets right back in the game, has a chance in the fourth quarter with the possession to tie the game, and just couldn't get it done as Silver Lake's defense held. But it was the game I expected it would be. I thought it would be a very close game. Dawson Hamas, who has missed the last 3 games for Rossville, did play. Gutted it out. He was in pain. I mean, you could tell he was hurting all night long, but you also could tell that when he's in there, Rossville's a very different team. And when he was in there, the offense flowed. It moved a lot better. And when he was not in there, it was kind of tough sledding for the Rossville offense. So having him back at full strength, if they can get him there by the end of the season, if these two teams meet again, it might be a totally different game. But Silver Lake kind of does what they do. They came out firing. They just have such an advanced passing game at the high school level. Most teams at the high school level, when they throw the ball, they're throwing deep, trying to score a touchdown. Silver Lake throws it to move the chains, and they run just great routes, and that's what they did tonight. They kind of picked apart a secondary for Rossville that's really the strength of their defense. It's the most veteran part of their defense, and Dalton Doltmeyer picked them apart in the first half, and Rossville stepped up in the second half. But I think it was a great test for both teams. They both kind of found out a little bit about themselves, and I won't be surprised if in another month we'll see this game again.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise any of us, I don't think. I mentioned earlier that Doltmeyer had a 303-yard night, 224 of that was passing yards, so he did kind of pick them apart. Pistol, your game wasn't nearly as close, but I think we learned quite a bit about Washburn Rural tonight. Maybe didn't make the statement necessarily that Silver Lake made, but they made a pretty good statement in their own right.
No, I think they're pretty good. I mean, I thought going into the season that Washburn Rural might be the city's surprise team, and I'm not going away from that. They got 2 losses to undefeated teams, Manhattan and Junction City, and had Junction City on the ropes. And except for a few big plays by Manhattan, played Manhattan close in a 28-6 game. So I think Washburn Rural is pretty good. What I like about Washburn Rural is they got several weapons. They're using 2 sophomore quarterbacks that both give them a little bit different things. And Jordan White tonight had 3 touchdowns running and also threw for a touchdown. Preston Williams, the other sophomore quarterback, threw for a touchdown. They also have a very good defense. They got good receivers. And Hunter Browning's a heck of a running back. I think this game next week's going to tell us a whole lot when they play Topeka High. And whoever wins that game is going to be in great position to get a good seed for the playoffs.
That's a perfect segue, actually. We'll move on to our second segment of the show, points of emphasis. And the first note that I had was specifically about what you just mentioned, that next week's game between Washburn Rural and Topeka High, it's kind of shaping up to be a real dandy.
Well, and whoever wins that game has a chance to go 6-2 in the regular season, and they'll definitely be at home. And I think right now, both of them, if they take care of business the rest of the way over the next 3 weeks, have a chance to be at home for the playoffs. And that's going to be huge under this new system to get those first game or two at home. They both have great running attacks. They both can throw the ball. They both have good defenses. I'm glad I got a few days to think about it, but I think it could be a very, very good, high-scoring game.
Well, it certainly looks like a classic showdown between Washburn Rural's defense and a very explosive Topeka High offense, or potentially explosive Topeka High offense. We mentioned Kai Thomas earlier today. He could be a real challenge for the Trojans next week, or for the Junior Blues next week, couldn't he?
Well, the best thing about Kai Thomas is I think they get Corey Thomas back next week. At least they're hopeful of getting Corey Thomas back next week. That allows Corey Thomas to go back to quarterback and Kai Thomas to go as a wideout, go as a running back. And with those two together, they got so many different ways they can hurt you. So they're going to be a test for Washburn Rural. But Washburn Rural, on the other hand, has several weapons of its own. And they showed that tonight. I mean, Colin Wilson had 2 TD catches. Both the quarterbacks threw for touchdowns. Hunter Browning had 146 yards. I just think, like I said, I think it's going to be a dandy of a game, and probably the best game, city game, to this point anyway, in a year where there's been some close games.
Brent, talking about explosive players, we mentioned Doltmeyer earlier, and you touched on Hamas's return. But you saw some explosive guys today as well.
Yeah, Jacob Bradshaw and Dalton Doltmeyer were kind of the focal points of each team's respective offense. And Bradshaw's had a great year, in his first year at quarterback, replacing Tucker Horrock, and has kind of been a little Tucker Horrock light. Not quite the same explosiveness that Tucker had, but he's done a tremendous job with that team, especially given the fact that kind of everything's on his shoulders offensively with Dawson being out. I mean, you take a 1,000-yard rusher out of that offense, and that's a big thing. And Silver Lake was able to kind of key on him and say, hey, somebody else going to have to beat us type of deal. And they did a really good job of kind of limiting Jacob's effectiveness tonight. And Doltmeyer was kind of the same for Silver Lake. He had the ball in his hand a lot. He had most of the carries for the team, and obviously was very good throwing the ball. So, I think both quarterbacks are just really, really solid players that they bank on.
It doesn't matter what level of football you're playing, you better have a good quarterback, and we saw evidence of that tonight from a lot of different guys, not only Doltmeyer and Ian Trapp, Kai Thomas that we've mentioned, even Dalton Cowan had an okay night for Seaman in a losing effort. But the other thing that kind of jumped out at me tonight was just how many good rushing performances we had. Again, Thomas and Trapp kind of going off tonight, both of them having over 200 yards rushing, and then Emporia has a couple guys, Sawyer Sladen and Anthony Delgado, who both eclipsed the 100-yard mark against Topeka West. So just in the area, we've got a lot of guys, either whether you're talking about quarterbacks, running backs, whatever, got a lot of guys that are really kind of fun to watch.
Yeah, and even if you kind of even step a little further out in the area, Santa Fe Trail had a big win tonight, beating Wellsville, and Peyton Newton for them went over 200 yards. That's his fourth game in 5 games this year that he's gone over 200 yards. And they're a team that's going to be in the district with Hayden and Holton later this year. And the way they're running the ball, that's a recipe to win when you get into district play. They're going to be a tough out when it comes to district if Holton and Hayden both want to get out of that district, especially with Newton carrying the ball like he's been carrying it this year. 4 games. He's one of the leading rushers in the state right now, and this is really his first year as their full-time tailback, go-to back there. So I think there's some really good running backs and guys that can, not just running backs, quarterbacks that can carry the ball in this area.
Just to anybody in the city that I have failed to mention, or the area for that matter, that you've seen or really like.
Well, I like a lot of the running backs. I like Christian Clark of Shawnee Heights. I like Hunter Browning. Obviously, Kai Thomas when he plays running back. Thomas Stringer's had a good year for Hayden. But the thing about, there's several quarterbacks that can beat you with their legs and not just their arms. And Corey Thomas and Kai Thomas both go into that. Jordan White of Washburn Rural is a guy you got to be sure you stay home on, or he's going to beat you with his legs. And there's several dual threat quarterbacks this year that that really have stood out so far.
White with kind of proved your point tonight. 3 scores on the ground and another one passing. So excellent point. That'll wrap up our points of emphasis segment, and that'll take us to our final segment of the night, exclamation points. How do each of you guys want to wrap up this show?
Well, my exclamation point is, 5 games into his career, I think I got to look at Kai Thomas as the best freshman, one of the best freshmen, and probably the best freshman I've seen in 37 years of covering high school football. A lot of coaches don't even like to trot freshmen out there. They're kind of scared, one, to, get them kind of shell-shocked right off the bat. Seems to be no shell shock with Kai Thomas. I mean, I saw his very first game against Hayden, and they were using him all over the place. And this is a kid that plays defense and has had a defensive touchdown. He plays receiver. He plays running back. He plays quarterback. He scored 30 points tonight, and Walt Alexander, Topeka High's coach, doesn't seem scared at all about putting him in any position. And Kai Thomas doesn't seem to be scared about being put in any position. And he's going to be fun to watch. You hate to talk about, you hate to put that much pressure on a kid early, but it's impossible not to talk about him with what he's already done this year.
Well, he doesn't just score them. He kind of scores them in dynamic or electric fashion. I mean, some of those runs that he had tonight were off the charts.
Well, we're sitting there watching videos of a freshman, how many times does that happen?
Right,
So it's
absolutely.
just he's way, way, way ahead of what I think he thought or Walt thought he'd be this early in his career.
Absolutely. Brent, that kind of leaves the final word for you tonight.
Well, tonight I had the War on 24, and next week we got another big rivalry game that involves the Centennial League. You got Manhattan against Junction City next week, the only 2 undefeated teams left in the Centennial League, and two of only a handful of undefeated teams left in 6A. And going into the season, I would have probably given the edge to Junction City as just the guys that they had back, maybe a little bit over Manhattan, but the way they've played this year, Manhattan has been very impressive with what they've gone out and done, and this game is kind of like the War on 24. It doesn't matter how either team has played up to that point in the season. Last year, Manhattan had as down of a season as Manhattan's had in a decade, and yet Junction City, who was undefeated in the regular season last year, has to go to overtime to beat Manhattan. Right. So I think that's going to be a great game to watch. The winner, obviously, probably is going to be your Centennial League champion this year. And I think it's going to be a great game. Ian Trapp for Manhattan, Ryan Hennington for Junction City. The 2 quarterbacks have been very, very good this year. Javon Baldwin, Iverson Robb for Manhattan, Javon Baldwin for Junction City. Dynamic players to kind of go with them. I think it's going to be a great game next week.
Should be two. We've got two great 6A games, the one here in town and that one. That'll be awesome. Well, that'll wrap it up for this week's show. We thank you again for joining us, and be sure to check out the pages of the Capital Journal and cjonline.com and prepzone.com for all your high school coverage. Thanks a bunch.